The morning they came for inspection, I hadn't slept. Not because of the mission brief we'd gotten the night before, not because of the wind that had been rattling the tin roof of Barrack C since midnight like something impatient to get in. I hadn't slept because Private Nadia Reyes was in the bunk 2 rows down from mine, and, at 0200 hours I'd heard her sitting up in the dark, not crying exactly, but breathing in that particular held-together way people breathe when crying would cost them something they can't afford to lose. I knew that sound. I'd made it myself, first week of basic. I pretended not to hear. That was my first mistake. Forward operating base Kestrel sat about 40 kilometers south of nothing you'd find on a civilian map, a cluster of prefab structures, sandbag walls, a motor pool that smelled permanently of diesel and rust, and approximately 300 soldiers living inside the particular kind of silence that only exists when everyone around you is also waiting for something bad. The desert here wasn't the desert from movies. There were no rolling dunes, no poetic sunsets worth photographing. The ground was pale grey, almost chalky, and it cracked under your boots like the earth itself had given up trying. The mountains in the distance were brown. The sky was white before noon, then orange, then a dark that came down fast and complete, like a lid closing on a jar. We'd been at Kestrel for 6 weeks. Long enough that the newness had worn off and the routines had set in, which is when fobs get dangerous, not from the outside, but from the inside. Boredom and hierarchy and the particular cruelties that emerge when people are cooped up with nowhere to put their fear except onto each other. First Sergeant Dale Murchison ran inspection like it was his personal crusade against disorder in a disorderly universe. Mid-50s, built like a filing cabinet, a voice like gravel being poured into a metal drum. He'd been in the army for 31 years. Longer than some of us had been alive. He wore his seniority the way some men wear cologne, in a way that preceded him into every room and lingered after he left. He wasn't cruel, exactly. That's what made it complicated. He was precise. And precision, applied without discretion, becomes its own kind of brutality. I was in line at 0615, boots polished, weapon clean, waiting. The morning was already warm. That particular FOB smell was in the air, burned coffee, hydraulic fluid, the faint chemical tang of the latrines 2 buildings over. Sergeant Torres stood to my left, chewing the inside of his cheek the way he did when he was nervous. Corporal Brightwell stood to my right, eyes forward, expression blank. We'd done this 100 times. You develop a way of existing inside your body during inspection, a kind of voluntary suspension, present enough to respond, absent enough that none of it touches you. Then, Murchison reached Reyes. She was 3 soldiers down from me. I didn't turn my head. You don't, not during inspection, not with Murchison. But I had peripheral vision and I'd been half watching her all morning with a low-grade, involuntary worry of someone who'd heard another person not cry at 0200. She was 23. Youngest in the unit. From somewhere in southern Texas, a town small enough that when she mentioned it, even the Texans shrugged. She'd been assigned to us 8 weeks ago, straight out of AIT, and she had the specific quality of someone who had worked very hard to appear unremarkable, kept her head down, did her work, made no noise that wasn't required of her. She wasn't invisible, exactly. She was effaced. Like she'd made a decision about taking up space and had decided the answer was as little as possible. Murchison stopped in front of her. Long pause. The kind that has a shape to it. Reyes. First Sergeant. Your left sleeve. She looked down. I risked a quarter turn of my head. There was a pull in the stitching at her shoulder seam, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd need to be looking for to find, or the kind of thing you'd find if you were looking for anything at all. Uniform deficiency, Murchison said. Not loud. He didn't need loud. In my formation. First Sergeant, I can explain. I don't need an explanation, Private. I need a soldier who can maintain her equipment. Do you understand the difference? Yes, First Sergeant. Do you? He took a half step closer. The rest of the line went absolutely still in the way that 300 people can sometimes go still simultaneously, like a single held breath. Because I'm looking at a soldier who has been on this FOB for 8 weeks and cannot manage the maintenance of a uniform. That concerns me, Private. That tells me something. First Sergeant, I didn't ask you to speak. She closed her mouth. I watched her jaw set. That small, specific thing. What it tells me, Murchison continued, still in that precise, measured tone that was somehow worse than shouting, is a question of commitment. A question of whether this individual takes the uniform, what the uniform represents, seriously. I've seen it before. Someone who's here for reasons that have nothing to do with service. Who treats the army as a, "That's enough, First Sergeant." The voice came from behind us. Captain Lena Vasquez had not been scheduled for this inspection. That was the first thing I processed, in the fraction of a second between her voice and everyone's heads turning, not rotating dramatically, just shifting slightly, the way people shift when authority redistributes itself in a room. Captain Vasquez ran Alpha Company with a particular style that the unit had spent 6 weeks trying to decode. She wasn't warm, not the way some officers performed warmth as a management technique. She wasn't cold either. She was present. Specifically, uncomfortably present. The kind of officer who listened to what you didn't say and filed it alongside what you did. She was 36. Brown skin, black hair pulled back in a regulation bun so precise it looked architectural. A vertical scar along her left jawline that nobody discussed, the way people don't discuss things that suggest a story too serious to be conversation. She moved through the formation without hurry, which meant Murchison had no dignified way to move toward her, and she reached Reyes before he could reposition. She stood in front of the private for a moment. Just looked at her. Not the way Murchison had looked, cataloguing deficiency, measuring against standard. Something else. The way you look at something you recognize. "Private Reyes," she said. "Mum. Dismissed from inspection. Report to my office at 0800. Reyes blinked. "Mum." That wasn't a question, Private. "Yes, Reyes stepped back. Filed out. The inspection resumed. But something had shifted in the air, the way pressure shifts before weather, and every soldier in that line felt it even if none of us could have named it. And I stood there in the white morning heat thinking about a sound I'd heard at 0200, the way Nadia Reyes's jaw had set when Murchison told her to stop speaking. And, I thought, she didn't look like someone ashamed of a loose seam. She looked like someone protecting something. I didn't find out what happened in that office right away. The Army is not a place that moves information laterally between ranks in ways that are either fast or reliable. What you know because you were there or because someone who was there trusted you enough to tell you. And trusted at FOB is a currency people spend carefully. What I knew by 1100 hours was second-hand, passed to Torres by Brightwell who'd been delivering supply manifests to the admin block and had caught the tail end of something through an open window, which is not intelligence you'd want to rely on but which was better than nothing. The captain had asked Reyes about the uniform. Reyes had explained, not the sleeve, but something else. Something she'd been carrying. Torres told me this while we were eating. Gray reconstituted something, the FOB's particular interpretation of lunch. He leaned across the table and said it quiet, the way you say things that feel heavier than their words. She had something sewn into the lining, he said. I stopped eating. Of the uniform. Inside the seam. That's why it was pulled. She'd opened the stitching and put something in there and re-sewed it herself, and it wasn't holding. I thought about that for a second. About what a person sews into the lining of a military uniform and carries against their body into a forward operating base 40 kilometers from anything. What was it? I asked. Torres looked at his food. A medal, he said. Bronze star. Worn smooth. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Because a bronze star is not a decoration you carry in your pocket or stitch into a seam because you're proud of it. You carry it that way because it belonged to someone who isn't carrying it anymore. Because you need it close to you in the way that defies military logic and serves a different logic entirely, the logic of grief, which has no regulation, no formation time, no standard by which it can be measured and found deficient. I put my fork down. Outside, the desert wind picked up, and sand ticked against the window in small, insistent impacts, the way small things do when they have no choice but to keep trying. By 1400 hours the story had moved through the unit the way stories move, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece slightly different from the last, the original shape of the truth distorted by the passage through so many mouths. What I heard was this: the medal had belonged to Reyes's father. Master Sergeant Hector Reyes, 75th Ranger Regiment, killed in action 11 years ago when Nadia was 12, in a country that had a different name than the country we were currently deployed in but the same coordinates on the same moral map. He'd received the Bronze Star posthumously. Her mother had kept it. When her mother died, 2 years ago, cancer, the kind that moves fast, Nadia had taken the medal. When she'd enlisted, she'd taken it with her. She couldn't wear it. It wasn't hers to wear. But she couldn't leave it either. So she'd done the only thing available to her, opened a seam, folded the ribbon around the medal, and stitched it back into the lining of the uniform she wore every day, which was the same uniform her father had worn, or near enough that it served the same purpose. And the seam had held for 6 weeks and 800 miles of patrol and daily inspections and all the 1,000 physical demands of a military deployment, and then, one morning it had finally, given slightly, just enough, just a few threads, just barely visible if you were looking for something to find. And Murchison had been looking. I thought about what he'd said. Someone who's here for reasons that have nothing to do with service. I sat with that for a long time. The afternoon mission brief was at 1600. Routine patrol, northeastern perimeter, overnight return. I was in the briefing room when Captain Vasquez came in and I watched her the way I'd been watching her all day, trying to read something in the set of her face. She gave the brief clean and efficient, no excess, the way she always did. Route, comms protocol, ROE reminders, weather window. When she finished, she paused, just a second, the kind of pause that in a different context would be nothing, but in this one landed on the room with a slight weight. One more thing, she said. She reached into the chest pocket of her jacket and set something on the table. Small. Rectangular. The ribbon faded, the metal worn to a softness that comes only from years of being held. Nobody spoke. My grandfather, she said, carried it for 11 years. Gave it to me the day I left for West Point. Told me it belonged to whoever was serving, not whoever was sitting still. She picked it up, put it back in her pocket. Dismissed. The room cleared. I was the last one out. In the hallway, Torres fell into step beside me. She didn't have to do that, he said. No, I said. She didn't. We walked out into the white afternoon heat, where the desert stretched in all directions without apology, and somewhere across the motor pool Private Nadia Reyes was prepping her kit for a patrol, and the medal was, I was almost certain, still stitched into the lining of her sleeve, or perhaps in her chest pocket, or perhaps simply held for a moment in her palm before she folded it back into wherever she kept the things that had no regulation but were non-negotiable. The wind came off the mountains flat and warm. Smelled like dust and something older than dust. I put my helmet on. The patrol left at 17:30. 12 soldiers, 2 vehicles, a route that had been run twice that week without incident, which in the logic of this particular stretch of desert meant either that it was safe or that it was overdue. Nobody said that out loud. Nobody needed to. We were all doing the same math. I was in the second vehicle, right side, behind Corporal Brightwell on the gun. Torres was driving. Reyes was 3 seats ahead of me in the first vehicle, which I could see through the dusty windshield as a shape in the dark when the light hit it right. We'd gotten our NVGs calibrated before departure. The radio was doing its usual thing, intermittent chatter, frequencies checked and rechecked, the particular static of communication infrastructure held together by patches and prayer. The landscape at dusk out here does something to you if you let it. The grey chalk ground turns the colour of old bone. The mountains go purple, then black, then disappear entirely into a sky that out here, away from any ambient light, goes a dark that has depth to it, not flat, but layered, like you could put your hand into it and not find the back. The stars come out fast and complete, the way they only do in places where humans have not yet managed to dilute the dark with their presence. They were very bright. Indifferent in the specific way that beautiful things are indifferent, not hostile, just unconcerned. I'd grown up in Ohio. Small city, orange glow on the horizon every night, stars something you mostly forgot about. Here, they pressed down on you. I tried not to look at them too long. They made you feel small in a way that wasn't useful on patrol. We were 40 minutes out when the radio gave us something. Not a contact report. Not incoming. A sound, the kind of anomalous nothing that trained ears recognize as something, like the silence a conversation makes when it stops at the wrong moment. Sergeant Okafor, running comms in the lead vehicle, broke it quietly over the internal net. Getting some interference on secondary. Could be terrain. Could be something running on adjacent frequency. Lieutenant Marsh, leading the patrol from the first vehicle, came back even quieter. Copy. Eyes up. Maintain pace. I looked out the window at the dark. The road was a pale line in the NVGs. The terrain on either side was broken, shallow ridgelines, scrub growth, the kind of ground that provides cover for a person who wants to use it. Torres, who had been doing this for 9 years, said nothing. He drove with both hands on the wheel and, his jaw at a particular angle that meant he was listening to something I couldn't hear, which was his 9 years of experience processing inputs that my 3 years hadn't yet taught me to read. Okafor's right about the frequency thing, he said quietly, not into the radio. To me, or to the vehicle, or to no one. Heard it before, second week we were here. Turned out to be nothing. Equipment issue at the relay station. Turned out, I said. Yeah, he said. Turned out. The vehicles kept moving. Another 20 minutes. The interference on secondary got worse, then, cleared, then, came back at a different tone that Okafor identified, over net, as a possible active transmission being jammed or bounced off the ridgeline. Lieutenant Marsh made the call to slow and wait while he ran it up to Kestrel. We stopped on a flat section of road, both vehicles angled slightly for mutual coverage, and waited. Waiting on patrol at night is its own specific physical experience. Your body doesn't understand why it stopped. You've been vibrating with forward movement and alertness and the particular tension of transit through potentially hostile terrain, and then you stop, and all of that has nowhere to go. Your legs want to move. Your hands check the weapon again even though you checked it 30 seconds ago. Your eyes move across the same arc of dark over and over, cataloguing the same rocks and scrub in the same NVG green, and every time they complete the arc you're briefly sure that something has changed and then briefly sure that nothing has, and this cycle repeats until your brain is running slightly ahead of itself, outpacing sense. I was 3 cycles into this when I noticed Reyes. She'd exited the first vehicle, standard halt protocol, dismount and establish perimeter. She was at the forward left position, rifle up, scanning. Nothing unusual in any of that. What I noticed was smaller, the way her left hand, every 30 seconds or so, moved from the foregrip of her rifle to the front of her jacket. Not grabbing. Not adjusting. Just touching. 1 second. The contact of fingertips against fabric. Then, back to the foregrip. Then, 30 seconds later, again. She didn't know I was watching. The NVGs make you feel invisible in a way that isn't true but feels absolute. I thought about what was on the other side of that fabric. A worn bronze medal, the ribbon softened by years and hands. The physical proof that someone had been here before her, in a different country with the same coordinates, and had done something worth recording. Had done something worth carrying. I looked back at my own sector. I thought, she's not carrying her father's past. She's carrying her own nerve. Marsh came back on net at 2047. Kestrel confirms relay issue. Secondary is clear. Move on. We moved. The next 40 minutes were unremarkable in all the ways a patrol wants to be unremarkable. The interference resolved. The radio was clean. The road was empty. The mountains tracked us on the left, indifferent and enormous, and the sky above them was a blaze of stars that I tried, again, not to look at for too long. We hit the waypoint at 2134 and stopped to confirm positioning and rest the drivers. That's when Reyes found it. She'd gone 20 meters off the road on a standard perimeter check. By the book, proper spacing, Marsh had cleared it. Standard scan of the immediate terrain. What she found was not standard. A pressure plate. Old. Partially exposed, probably by erosion or recent vehicle passage on the road shifting the ground. In the dark, through NVGs, it was a slight regularity in an irregular surface, a line too straight, a depression too deliberate. Most soldiers don't see them. You develop the eye for it over time, or you don't, and the cost of not is non-negotiable. She saw it. She froze. Went to net immediately. Romeo 6, this is Reyes. I have a possible IED, 20 meters off the main road at the waypoint, requesting EOD and halt. Her voice on the radio was completely flat. Not controlled, not measured. Flat in the way that something goes flat when all the available processing power is being spent on seeing clearly and there is simply nothing left over for tone or effect. Pure signal, no noise. Marsh's response was immediate. All elements halt. Reyes, hold position, Do not move. EOD protocol. Confirm you are static. Confirmed. Static. I have eyes on. Copy. Kestrel. This is Kilo 7 actual. The radio filled up. Everyone else went quiet. In the second vehicle, Torres breathed out through his nose in a long slow exhale and looked at me in the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second with an expression that said, without ambiguity, she found it, and the weight of what that meant, that she found it standing, which meant it had not found her, was present in that second in a way that I felt in my chest. Good eye, Torres said. To nobody. To the dark. EOD took 40 minutes to reach us. 40 minutes in which Reyes held position, 20 meters off the road, in the dark, maintaining visual on a pressure plate that was old and corroded and possibly inert and possibly not. She didn't move. She didn't speak on net except when Marsh checked her every 10 minutes. And each time she answered clean. Reyes, status. Static, eyes on, all clear in my immediate. Copy. I sat in the vehicle and looked at the green shape of her through the windshield and thought about the word courage, which is one of those words that gets used so often and in so many contexts that it loses its actual meaning. The way coins lose their relief from years of circulation, the image rubbed smooth, barely there. She was 23. She'd heard at 0200 and made no sound. She'd stood in front of Murchison and set her jaw. She was standing in the dark next to something that could kill her, by herself, for 40 minutes, and the only thing she'd said was static, eyes on, all clear. The word courage. I turned it over. Found the image still on it. Not worn at all. EOD confirmed the device was live. Old, probably 18 months in the ground, possibly longer, but viable. A command wire running northeast that had been severed, probably months ago, which is why the pressure plate was the remaining activation method and why it hadn't gone off from road vibration, though EOD's assessment was that sufficient weight would have done it. Sufficient weight. Our vehicles had passed within 30 meters of that waypoint twice this week. The EOD tech, a sergeant first class named Holloway who had the permanent expression of someone who'd made peace with impermanence, gave Reyes a single nod after the controlled detonation. Not a speech. Not a commendation. A nod, the specific economy of which contained everything. She nodded back. We moved back to Kestrel. We rolled through the gate at 0115. I was running on the particular side of exhaustion where things become briefly very clear, where the noise in your head that runs constantly, cataloguing and worrying and calculating, goes briefly quiet and you see what's in front of you without the usual static. What I saw was 12 soldiers filing off 2 vehicles in a motor pool lit by harsh yellow floodlights, moving with the specific deliberate slowness of people who have been alert for 8 hours and are allowing themselves, carefully, to begin to come down. Reyes was behind me, stowing her kit. I turned to her. I wanted to say something worth saying. I spent a second looking for it and found, in the specific way that moments of actual importance often leave language inaccessible, exactly nothing adequate. What I said was, "Good eye out there." She looked at me. A pause. "It was the light," she said. "The way it hit the edge. My dad used to say the desert shows you what it wants you to see when it's ready." She picked up her kit. Walked toward the barracks. I stood in the motor pool with the diesel smell and the cooling engine tick and the night pressing down from above, enormous and star-heavy, and thought about a man I'd never met who'd said something to a girl who was now here, 23 years old, carrying his words in the same lining as his medal, using both in a desert that might have been the same desert or a different one. Might not have mattered. What mattered was what you carried and whether it held. 3 days after the patrol, Captain Vasquez called a formation. Not the standard 0600 accountability, a full company formation, 0900 hours, which was unusual enough that by 0830 the speculation had already been running through the unit in multiple competing directions. Deployment extension. Leadership change. Some administrative thing that required everyone present so no one could claim they hadn't heard. I stood in my row and watched the door to the company offices and waited. The desert morning was already heating up, that specific quality of warmth that begins as pleasant and, within an hour, becomes something else entirely. The mountains were the color of dried clay. The motor pool to our left smelled, as always, of diesel and rust and the indefinite compound of 300 people's daily mechanical lives. A radio somewhere was carrying intermittent chatter. A generator cycled on. Murchison called the formation to attention. Vasquez came out. She had a way of standing in front of a formation that was different from most officers I'd served under. She didn't occupy the space performatively. No swagger, no deliberate pausing for effect. She simply was where she was, and, when she looked at you, you had the sense of being actually seen, which is rarer than it sounds in an institution organized largely around the management of people as units. She looked at the formation for a moment. Then, she said, "I'm going to tell you something that isn't in any field manual." Nobody moved. 3 nights ago, on a routine northeast perimeter patrol, Private First Class Nadia Reyes identified an active IED in the dark, at night, in terrain she had never walked before, and she held position on that device alone for 40 minutes while EOD was en route. She did not move. She did not lose the mark. The device was confirmed viable. The EOD tech assessed that without her identification, there was significant probability of that device being encountered by a follow-on patrol within 72 hours. "Your father earned this," Vasquez said. "You've been carrying it correctly." She placed it in Reyes's hands. Reyes looked down at it. That small, specific jaw set. Barely there. Gone. Then, nothing. Not tears, not a speech, not a visible dissolution of composure. She folded her fingers around the metal and stood straight and looked at the captain and said, "Thank you, Clean. Complete." Vasquez nodded.
Formation dismissed.
"I want to tell you that everything resolved cleanly after that. That's not how it works. Murchison was quiet for a week. Not chastened. Murchison didn't do chastened. He was recalibrating, which in a man who runs on 31 years of precision looks the same from the outside but is a different thing internally. I saw him pass Reyes in the motor pool 4 days later. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He looked at her for 1 second with something in his face that didn't have a regulation term but was adjacent to acknowledgement, which from Murchison was not nothing. She gave him a nod. He moved on. That was the end of it, or the beginning of a different it, which amounts to the same thing. The days that followed had the quality of days after a thing has happened and, before the next thing, a suspended quality, still and slightly strange. The patrol schedule continued. The radio chatter continued. The grey chalk ground cracked in the heat and the mountains sat unchanging on the horizon and the stars came out every night without having to be asked. The routines of a FOB reformed around the event and covered it over, the way water covers a stone, not erasing it, just making it part of the landscape. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not visibly. The way light shifts in the afternoon and you don't notice until the shadows are pointing somewhere different. Reyes moved differently. I don't mean physically, her posture, her gait. I mean the specific quality of presence in a room. The effacement was still there, the head down, the minimum necessary footprint. But it was volitional, now. You could see the difference. Before, she'd been making herself small because she was uncertain of her right to space. After, she was making herself small because she'd decided to, which is an entirely different thing that creates an entirely different impression on the people around you. Space you choose to take or leave is yours. Space you abandon because you're afraid, that one belongs to whoever wants it. The unit felt this without naming it. She got different. Not louder. Different. Torres put it in the best words I heard. We were on our second lunch of Gray reconstituted something. The FOB's interpretation of nutrition was consistent if nothing else, and he was watching Reyes across the room where she was talking to 2 newer privates, gesturing at something on a map they'd spread on the table. "She's teaching them to read ground," Torres said. "Yeah," I said. He chewed thoughtfully. "You know what that costs. To learn to read ground in the dark? What it costs to have the eye for it and not just the training for it." He paused. "That's something you inherit. My grandfather was a tracker. Knew terrain by feel. He passed it to my father passed it to me." He shrugged. "Some things can't be trained. You carry them or you don't." I looked at Reyes across the room. She was pointing at a contour line and saying something that made one of the newer soldiers nod slowly, the particular nod of a concept landing. What you inherit. What you carry. What you pass on. 3 different things that work together or don't work at all. I had one conversation with Reyes about her father. 1. She didn't invite more and I didn't push. The army teaches you, if it teaches you anything, that people have the right to the borders of their own grief and the only appropriate response to that border is to stop at it and wait to be invited. She invited me once. We were on a water run, the specific mundane logistics of a FOB, jugs and crates and the ancient cargo truck that served this particular purpose, and she was moving crates and I was moving crates and we were doing it in the comfortable silence of people who've worked together enough that silence doesn't need to be filled. She said, without preamble, he deployed 3 times before the last one. I was too young to remember the first one. I barely remember the second. I remember the third. I set down my crate. What do you remember? She thought about it. The way he smelled before he left. His uniform. That specific smell. I thought for years it was him, just him, the smell of my father. Then, I put on my first uniform and, she stopped. Picked up another crate. Same smell. She carried the crate to the truck. That's why I enlisted, she said. Flatly. No drama in it. Not the only reason. But. Yeah. She didn't say anything else. I didn't ask. The truck engine idled. The heat off the desert bounced back up from the ground in visible waves. Somewhere in the motor pool, metal rang against metal, someone working on an engine, the particular sound of mechanical problems being addressed by force. Same smell. I thought about that for a long time. 6 days before our rotation ended, Captain Vasquez called me into her office. I want to be honest about this. I was nervous. Not afraid. Vasquez didn't produce fear, exactly. She produced the specific alertness of being in the presence of someone who will notice everything and file it accurately. I knocked. She said enter. I entered. Her office had the standard FOB aesthetic, folding table, laptop, maps, the accumulated administrative evidence of running a 120-person company in a combat environment. On the corner of the table, a photograph I'd never seen before, a man in uniform, older, the photograph faded with the particular softness of age. Her grandfather, I assumed, or someone who served the same purpose. Corporal, she said. Mum. She looked at me for a second with that specific quality of looking. You've been watching out for Reyes, she said. Not a question. I started to say something measured and she cut me off with a brief gesture. I'm not asking you to confirm or deny it. I'm acknowledging it. She looked at the photograph on her table for a moment. We don't have a word for it in the army. The unofficial thing. The watching out. The 0200 hours awareness. She looked back at me. We have duty. We have mission. But what you're describing, when a unit actually holds together, that's something else. And it starts with one person noticing another person. I didn't know what to say to that. Reyes is going to be fine, Vasquez said. She was going to be fine regardless of what happened in that formation. Some people are made of something that doesn't require outside confirmation to hold. She paused. But it helps. Someone noticing. Someone not looking away. She picked up a pen, looked at a document on the table. The signal that the conversation was concluding. That's all, Corporal. I went to the door. Corporal. I stopped. You have good instincts, she said, still looking at the document. Train them. I went back to the barracks. I sat on my bunk for a few minutes in the particular stillness of a midday FOB, when most people are resting or working and the building has a sleeping quality to it, the hum of the generator, distant voices, the creak of a structure designed to be temporary and never designed to be comfortable. The white light through the window. The smell of boot polish and uniform fabric and the specific chemical smell of military-issue everything. Same smell, Reyes had said. I thought, that's what it is. You sign your name to an institution and the institution's smell becomes your smell, becomes the smell you'd recognize if your child came home wearing a uniform 20 years later. The thing that makes you say, yes, this is right, this is where the family goes. This is the thing we do. Not every family. Not most families. But some. The ones who carry medals in sewn-up seams. Our rotation ended on a Tuesday. The handover to the incoming unit took 2 days. The particular choreography of one group of people leaving a place they'd occupied and another group occupying it, the installation of new habits and the erasure of old ones, the administrative transfer of everything from weapon serials to FOB-specific knowledge that never makes it into any briefing document. We filed onto the transport in the early morning, 0430, the sky still dark but thinning in the east, a grey that would be orange in an hour, that white desert morning beginning its approach. The chalk ground under our boots. The diesel smell. The mountains still there, unchanging, the same color they'd been every morning and would be every morning after we were gone. I was near the back of the line. Reyes was a few places ahead. She had her kid on her back and she was moving forward with the specific deliberate quality she'd had since the patrol, the choosing to be here quality, the space taken by decision. The medal was, I didn't know. In her pocket, in her sleeve, in her hand. Somewhere on her, the way it had been somewhere on her every day, which was the only thing that mattered. She reached the transport ramp. Stopped for 1 second. She didn't look back at the FOB. She looked up, at the mountains, at the sky, at the strip of pale grey light that was the beginning of the morning. She was there for a second, just present, just looking, and I don't know what she was saying in her head or not saying or maybe just feeling in the specific wordless way that some things don't require language. Then, she went up the ramp. I followed. On the flight back I thought about what the captain had said. Some people are made of something that doesn't require outside confirmation to hold. I'd been thinking about it wrong. The formation, the presentation of the medal, the acknowledgement in front of 300 soldiers, I'd been thinking of that as the moment things changed for Reyes. The repair. The recognition correcting the humiliation. But that's not what happened. What happened is that Reyes had been holding together the entire time, through the 0200 not crying and the jaw-set at inspection and the 40 minutes in the dark next to an active device and all the days between, holding together not because she'd been recognized but because of what she was carrying and what it meant and the specific unbreakable logic of I am here because he was here and something passes between one person and another that doesn't end when the person does. The recognition was true and it mattered and Vasquez had done something real and human in that formation. But Reyes hadn't needed it to stand. She'd been standing. The rest of us were just finally seeing it clearly. I've been back home for 4 months now. I live in Ohio again, the orange glow on the horizon every night, the stars mostly invisible. I drink coffee that is not reconstituted. I sleep in a bed that doesn't move. The sounds at 0200 are traffic and wind and ordinary things. I think about Kestrel sometimes. The chalk ground and the diesel smell and the white mornings and the mountains that were always there and never cared. I think about Torres and his 9 years of quiet competence and the way he drove with both hands on the wheel and listened to things I couldn't yet hear. I think about Vasquez, who noticed what nobody else noticed and acted on it in a way that cost her nothing except the willingness to show what she carried. I think about Reyes most. Not because of the device, though I think about that too, the way you think about the near things, the probability-adjusted things, the what ifs that have no edge and keep going if you let them. I think about her because of what she showed me about carrying. I'd been in the army for 3 years and I'd thought I understood service. I understood training and mission and unit cohesion and the particular brotherhood of people who share a danger. What I hadn't understood, what I understood for the first time watching a 23-year-old woman stand absolutely still in the dark next to something that could kill her, touching the front of her jacket every 30 seconds with the tips of 2 fingers, was that service is also an act of inheritance. You carry what was given to you. Not to preserve it. Not even to honor it, exactly, though honor is part of it. You carry it because it belongs in motion. Because the things that matter aren't supposed to sit in a drawer somewhere going dull. They're supposed to be inside the seam of a uniform, against a living body, in the field, where they can do the same work they were given for. A bronze star worn smooth by years of hands. A soldier standing still in the dark. The thing the dark costs you, and the thing it gives you in return, which is not the same as what it took but is something. My grandfather didn't serve. Neither did my father. The medal in my family is not a medal. It's a photograph of a man I never met, my great-uncle, who went somewhere in 1944 and came back changed in a way that the family never fully named but that I can read now, having come back changed myself. Different kind of carrying. Same principle. You take what you were handed. You carry it into the field. You pass it on. Nadia Reyes was promoted to specialist 8 weeks after we returned. I heard this from Torres, who is still in, who sends me messages sometimes about nothing in particular that mean everything in general. He said she's doing well. He said she's been transferred to a training unit, which is a thing that happens to soldiers with particular qualities, the quality of being able to show other soldiers how to read ground in the dark, how to see the line that is too straight, how to hold still when it matters. He said she's good at it. I believed him immediately. Some things you can carry alone for years and years, in a sewn-up seam, against your body, in the dark. Then, one morning the seam comes loose, and the light hits it, and someone sees it. And it turns out you were never carrying it alone. You were just carrying it forward.